I don't think it's a secret that Staten Island is known out of the 5 boroughs as the forgotten borough. And someone who was born and raised in Staten Island for 25 years of my life, I've lived here. I'm very territorial about my island, and I defend my island because I understand there's so much rich history and culture to be found here. Located along the Arthur Kill, the Staten Island Ship Graveyard, or Whitty's Marine Scrapyard, serves as the final resting place for these forgotten ships. Opened in the early 1930s, at its peak, the Boneyard was home to more than 400 ships, ferries, and barges. Today, less than 100 vessels remain, most decayed beyond repair, serving as hollowed shells of their old self. All that remains is rusted steel, as the water slowly eats away the stories these ships could tell. A major motivation for filming the Boneyard came in the form of telling the stories of these ships. I noticed on YouTube specifically there was a lot of drone footage of the Boneyard, just static drone footage over music. But from my perspective, I wanted to know about the history of these ships, if it was even possible, because many of these ships are so decrepit and they're almost unrecognizable. But there's a handful that still are intact. So I started doing research and I found a very vibrant community of local historians that were identifying some of the shipwrecks found in this Boneyard. And I came across a couple very fascinating ships that I wanted to tell stories on. One of those ships was PC-1264. A submarine chaser, PC-1264 was one of only 2 U.S. Navy vessels to be manned by a predominantly African-American crew during World War II. Built in 1943, she has an active service record during World War II as an escort ship, defending merchant vessels across U.S. shores against German U-boats. And to top off all this fascination, I actually was able to find the commissioning of this ship in 1944, black and white commissioning footage showing the crew as they are. It's incredible. You see the faces of these men as they prepare for battle. It really came full circle with how the film turned out. And when you see the ship as it is today, there's one piece of the ship that's recognizable, and it's the circular wheelhouse. Without that, the ship will blend in with everything else. And I get very close up and through my drone to the ship, and you really see as it was to as it is now. And it makes you realize that this history is literally disappearing into the earth. And if I can tell even a piece of this story, which I think is fascinating to Staten Island, but can be reached to a larger audience, then I felt like as a filmmaker it was important to do so. My most recent documentary is called Loyalty and Rebellion. It's a documentary chronicling the historical significance of Staten Island during the American Revolutionary War and the effect the war had on island life at the time. To understand Staten Island's experience during the American Revolution, we first must explore the island's strategic significance during the British invasion of New York City. Located at the southernmost point of New York State, Staten Island was selected as the first landing spot for General William Howe, then Commander-in-Chief of the British forces, in his siege against New York City. From someone from Staten Island, I didn't realize what a critical role Staten Island played during the American Revolutionary War. It was the longest held British territory during the war for 7 years and 5 months, and it was really a staging ground, a home base for the British throughout the entire New York campaign. So I had the opportunity during that film to interview 2 prominent historians and scholars, Philip Pappas and Barnett Schechter, to really dive into a subject matter that I don't think many Staten Islanders know.
Staten Islanders almost saw like the Patriots as being occupiers. And when the British land on Staten Island, they're seen as the liberators. So Staten Islanders rejoiced at the British landing. And there is one moment where Staten Islanders burned in effigy leaders of the Patriot movement. Effigies of Washington, effigies of General Charles Lee, They also burned Continental script, which they were paid by Continental troops and militia.
Another short film I produced and directed was called The Seguine Mansion. It tells the story of the house, the Seguine Mansion, which is a 19th century Greek revival mansion in Staten Island, New York. And it tells the story through the lens of a man named George Burke. George Burke is a 90-year-old man who actually saved the home from the original owners. The original owners were getting older, and he made a promise to the original owner to buy this home. He put a lot of money into it and saved the house, and it's this gorgeous mansion on about 4 acres of land in Staten Island.
I always loved this house. I knew the Seguine family for years and years. Growing up, I grew up with the girls. We rode here. They were in the horses. I was into horses. Mrs. Seguine, Bess, she was a great horsewoman from Georgia. And I used to kid her. I used to say, Bess, I love your house. One day I'd love to own it. And she would say, no, 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 my girls, they want it. It's going to be their house. Well, then I was in the military and I was gone for years. And I came back to Staten Island and I came down to see the house. Well, the house was in not the best of shape, but the grounds were overgrown. The basement was flooded. There was no heating system. The electric was shot. Bess got a hold of me and she said, George, you always wanted this house. She said, why don't you save it? And I looked at it and I said, oh, there's not enough money in the world to save this.
It's true that a lot of people on Staten Island don't know many of the stories that I'm telling. And as someone who is young, this filmmaking journey wasn't just a journey of telling these stories, it was a journey about learning these stories. A lot of these stories I wasn't aware of either. So it was rewarding in the fact that it was an exploration for me as well. I think a lot of these films can be used as educational tools. I've started screening some of my films, specifically Loyalty and Rebellion, in schools, and I've gotten great feedback. When you tell them that John Adams, the second president of the United States, was in a house in Staten Island where they live around the block, it really piques interest. And especially a film like The Boneyard, which is so visually striking, and you get so up close and personal to these ships through the use of a drone. As an educational tool, I think that's the best way to get this out there. You start young, and you develop the interest in history, and specifically local history, as a young age, and it'll eventually grow, naturally over time. And that's what happened with me. Future generations will remember these ships as they were, not as they are. Learning from stories and pictures, devoid of feeling and emotion. And if all we can do is appreciate the present and the beauty this world has to offer, I think that's enough.